Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Kaz Graham. In this edition, we're in a Somerset orchard finding the best apples to make a belting cider, and anger from the Scottish fishing industry over the allocation of new government funds to boost the UK's fishing fleet and coastal communities.
We were absolutely shocked to learn that Scotland has been allocated less than 8% of this fund, when Scotland accounts for around about 60% of the UK fishing industry.
Well, we'll have more on that a little later in the programme. First of all, though, farming is a long game. We often hear that, but there aren't many who've been playing it quite as long as David Lightfoot from Cornwall. He started his career with a couple of cows he milked by hand and a few rented fields. He went on to farm for Prince Charles before he became king. And now, as he reaches his 100th birthday, David and his nephew Tim have been speaking to our reporter Rebecca Rooney.
My father had a farm at Poperro, Killigarth Manor it's called. So that was 200 odd acres, and that's where we were all brought up, a family of 9 of us.
As a boy, is that your earliest memories of being on the family farm?
Well, yes, yeah. Well, when we were brought up at the farm, and we used to milk cows after we was 6 years old, hand milk. And I made won prizes, hand milking cows. They would come and pick us up with their car from school and take us to farms to practice this hygiene and all that for milking cows.
Hand milking cows, that's an art, isn't it?
Yeah, and when there was big dudes like ploughing matches and things, they would take us around to farms in competitions, and it was the thing, we wouldn't much milk machines then, Then I started up on my own with a few acres. Dutchy Farm, and that one was 40 acres. And after 4 years, they said, we'd like you to take a bigger farm. So I went on to the bigger farm. That I was there until I retired.
What do you think of how you started out as a young farmer with how farming's changed in your lifetime?
Oh, well, a terrific amount, yeah. So it was up with the horses still. I've done, work with the farm with, it was too steep for tractors.
But it was different back then. When Uncle David started farming, like he says, he was doing the work with horses. When he started farming, he bought a milking stool and a cow, and away he went farming. Whereas today, if you want to start farming, start milking cows, you'd want £1 million. What Uncle used to pay for his entire farm when he started farming, you wouldn't be able to rent an acre of land for that in this day and age. Times have changed so much.
And you can hear more from Tim Lightfoot and his Uncle David in On Your Farm this Sunday morning at 6:30 and any time after that on BBC Sounds. Now, although there only ever seem to be about 4 or 5 types of apple on sale in supermarkets, there are more than 7,500 varieties worldwide. A project in a tiny corner of Somerset is currently identifying and documenting the rich variety of apple trees around the village of Kingsbury Episcopi. The Kingsbury Pomona project, set up by pomologist, that's an apple expert, Liz Copas, and Tim Gray of Parrot Cider, aims to uncover lost apple varieties and help keep the different genetic strains alive. Well, we are talking about cider and beer all this week on the programme, so we sent our reporter Fiona Clampin to the orchards at Burrow Hill Farm Cider, where she met Liz, Tim and Liz's apple-loving sheepdog, Emily.
These are the Stoke Reds, aren't they, we're coming into now? Tiny little round red apples. Make lovely cider.
So what makes a good cider apple?
Well, it has to have lots of sugar, of course, from the fermentation point of view, but it has to have a little bit of acidity. If it's a bittersweet cider apple, it has to have tannin, because tannin is what gives the cider that lovely colour. It's too hard to walk on these apples.
Really hard. This is a massive orchard where we are. There are apples all over the grass, and the smell of the apples rising up is quite incredible. This is really the epicentre of cider making in Somerset.
It really is. It's a strange thing about Stembridge and Kingsbury Episcopi. It's like a little hill in the middle of the levels with special soil and a special climate, I'm sure. And it's a very, very good place for growing apples. And there have been apples orchards here traditionally for centuries. There's a particularly big one here. Emily, you ready? Go on then. Oh, good girl. Oh, she's happy now. She's got an apple to eat.
So tell me about the project then that the two of you have got off the ground.
Tim was looking for local varieties, and there's one that we couldn't find. And I said, well, I'm sure we've seen it before. There's a thing called Lambrook Pippin, very local. And we've searched everywhere, and we sent likely ones up to be DNA tested, and they've all come back as, no, that's not it. That's something called improved Lambrook Pippin. But we're still hunting, and this is what keeps us going. And in the meantime, we've decided it was really worth logging all the ones that we can find that have come from this area, because they're all one big family.
The cider that we're drinking nowadays, right through the country, basically all starts with the varieties that come from here near enough. There's a few up around sort of Herefordshire way and all that.
Maybe they would dispute your view.
There's a few good ones there, but they can keep those.
But tell me about the project. What does it involve?
We just keep waiting for September each year, and then we get one go to look around some orchards before they're harvested, and then work out if we're going to DNA test something the year after.
We've gone back to the old history books, which have got some interesting analysis of juice and descriptions of fruit, the amount of tannin and the sugar and the acidity. And we've gone around the orchards talking to people. Do you know anything? Have you got any details of who planted this and what it was?
You've done some work in this particular orchard, and you found how many different varieties?
Oh, Tim and I went around the orchard the other day and we found 33 different varieties. Gosh.
There's one bush tree at the end of this orchard, just on an odd row that's just one tree left. It's called Cap of Liberty. It's probably been here for at least a couple hundred years, but it was used a lot to breed a lot of what we have now.
I think it's so important that we have as much data on the old varieties as possible, because we need all the genetic material that we can. We're going to need it in the future for all sorts of things we might need to do. So knowing where the trees are and what their DNA is and what their properties are will be a very useful thing to do. It's a database which is going to store up all that genetic material.
Pomologist, great word. Liz Copas, ending that report from Somerset by Fiona Clampin. Anger, dismay and a sense of betrayal. That's how the SNP described the response of Scottish coastal communities to the allocation of money to Scotland from the UK's new Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund in Parliament yesterday. The £360 million fund was first announced back in May, and it aims to modernise Britain's fishing fleet, enhance workforce skills and revitalise coastal communities. But it was only earlier this week that the sums to be received by the devolved governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland were made public. This is how Dame Angela Eagle, DEFRA's Fisheries Minister, explained the process behind the allocations.
We've now devolved a fund using the way that devolutions of funds always happens, using the Barnett formula, Mr. Speaker, which gives a 20% per head uplift to devolved governments for all other spending.
Well, that method of calculating how much each government gets leaves Scotland with just under 8% of the fund, despite accounting for more than 60% of the UK's fishing capacity and producing more than 60% of UK seafood exports. Well, we'll be hearing from Scotland shortly. But before that, here's Mike Cohen, CEO of the National Federation of Fishermen's Organisations, which represents England and Wales.
Very pleased to see funding announced for the fishing industry. I'm very pleased with the emphasis around funding specifically for training, for new technology, for innovation, and for the sorts of projects that will lead to growth. So I'm hopeful that we won't see this money diverted into other projects, certainly something we've seen with past initiatives that have supposed to be aimed at the fishing industry but have ended up with money going elsewhere.
It's called the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund. What is your understanding of what this fund will actually pay for? Is it going to be looking at coastal communities as well that aren't involved in fishing?
I've seen reference to kind of broader community projects. The statements that the government has made so far have been around training for people wanting to enter the fishing industry, for new fishing gear, new fishing technology. And there's been a lot of talk about projects that will aid growth. And I think that's something that we should be quite optimistic about.
OK, you are evidently pretty positive about this announcement. Fishing organisations in the devolved nations may say, no wonder you're happy. England has been allocated the lion's share of this fund, more than £300 million compared to less than 60 million going to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland together. I mean, is that a fair allocation of funds?
We represent England and Wales, so we're not just an English organisation, we have a large Welsh membership too. The issues around the allocation of the fund they're not something I can really comment on. The government's rationale for this appears to be around the Barnett formula.
Why can't you comment on it? Because, the Scottish fishing industry are furious about this. We're going to be hearing from them shortly.
Sure. My job is to represent my membership, and all I can really say is that I'm pleased that we've got some money that hopefully is going to be spent on growth, that is going to be spent on businesses and communities that will benefit for it. I can well understand others wanting more, and the division is certainly a surprise. But in terms of my membership, I can see real benefits, particularly in the smaller vessel sector, which stands to benefit the most from this, I think, if it's well applied.
Mike Cohen. Well, this announcement of how the new fund has been allocated between the nation states of the UK has, as we've mentioned, not gone down well in Scotland, and that is putting it mildly. Mary Goujon, Scotland's Rural Affairs Secretary, has written to Dame Angela Eagle saying that Scotland's share of the funding is wholly unacceptable. Elspeth MacDonald is CEO of the Scottish Fishermen's Federation.
Well, we were absolutely shocked to learn that Scotland has been allocated less than 8% of this fund, when Scotland accounts for around about 60% of the UK fishing industry. And in previous funding models, Scotland's allocation of these types of funds was in the region of 47%. So we had no prior notice that this was coming. So to say we were completely shocked is an understatement.
DEFRA says that they're targeting investment where it matters most across the UK. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think when such a big part of the UK fishing industry is in Scotland, I think it would be reasonable to expect that investment in Scotland and maintaining our industry for the future, particularly when the government did such a bad deal in the EU reset, that I think it feels that, Scotland should have a far fairer share.
And the way that it was divvied up, apparently it was the Barnett formula that it was calculated under, and that's the formula that's been used since 1979, late 70s, to calculate Westminster allocation of funds to the UK nations. What do you think of that? Was the Barnett formula the right way to go here?
Well, we would say not, because in the past it was recognised that Scotland was a very large part of the UK fishing industry, and that's why we used to get 47% of those types of funds. Now, we understand from DEFRA that Treasury changed the rules, or changed their own internal rules on this back in October last year, but they certainly didn't bring that to anybody in the industry's attention, certainly in our industry.
It is to support coastal communities as well. It's not just to support fishing. It's much broader than that, to regenerate coastal communities, including ones where fishing isn't a major employer. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? Especially when the industry is thriving in some Scottish ports.
Well, I think it's important to remember that the reason that this fund was put in place was because of the EU reset deal that was done on fishing back in May by the Prime Minister. And the fishing industry across the UK was very clear that the majority of this fund should be used for the fishing industry, which was having to swallow yet another 12 years of unfettered access by the EU fleet into UK waters. This has not been properly designed, and we would really call on the UK government to revisit this decision.
That's Elspeth MacDonald from the Scottish Fishermen's Association. We approached DEFRA for a response, and they told us this fund will revitalise the fishing sector and coastal communities right across the UK, spurring growth as part of our plan for change. Supporting devolved governments with this new funding will help get the money to where it's most needed, so the sector can thrive for generations to come. And that's all from us for today. I'm Kaz Graham. The producer is Rebecca Rooney. And Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.